Good afternoon, all. Thank you for joining us for another live online CIF webinar. You're very welcome. I guess the topic of today's discussion is around work permits for construction. So my name is John Egan. I work with CIF, and I'm delighted to be joined by Colin Hilliard. He's a director of Work Permits Ireland. So Work Permits Ireland, they're corporate members of the CIF, and as Colin will explain, they're vastly experienced in terms of Work Permits Ireland, and they're going to share some of that knowledge and experience with us today. So we're going to run through a prepared presentation. At the end, there'll be an opportunity for questions.
Okay. Hi, ladies and gentlemen. You're very welcome this afternoon to this presentation. Hopefully I can make this as interesting as possible for you. We're just going to talk briefly about who we are. Work Permits Ireland is the business entity that we're trading under at the moment regarding employment permits. So we established this part of our company in 2018, and we have a team of highly experienced immigration consultants. When I say that, we've experience going back to 1997. So there are two of us who are the main directors of the company. It's myself, Colin Hilliard, and Paul Cullen, both of us with the same experience. Work Permits Ireland is part of another company, and that side of the company, PC Immigration Ireland, was established in 2015, which deals primarily with the residency permissions granted, or maybe not granted, as the question may arise, with the Department of Justice. So the Work Permits Ireland, which is what you're interested in today, we represent clients from all over the globe. We have small to multinational entities based in UK, Europe, Canada, Australia, the States, South America, India, Africa, China, Japan, just to name a few. And this is growing in terms of some of the industries that we represent. The service we provide is primarily fee-based. In addition, we'd say to the official government charges. In that, what I mean is that when we make an application for an employment permit, obviously there's a standard fee to the Department of Business and Enterprise, usually of €1,000 for the typical application. So our fees come in on top of that. There are external fees as well, such as maybe advertising, translation of documents, various different bits and pieces like that. But the service we provide is designed to eliminate stress and uncertainty associated with the preparation and submission of all types of applications. This process begins with an applicant. Actually, there's two parts of it. We have the employee and the employer. So there's two parts of the equation. So we always like to do a form of consultation with the applicant, the employee, because obviously there's certain information regarding the person's background, the person's qualifications, maybe their immigration history in Ireland. If not, might be in other countries, because that can also have a bearing down the line when we're looking for entry visas. The employer consultation, generally it's face-to-face. We can come and meet people, or people might want to come to our offices and meet them. We follow up when an application is made. We also follow up with the department. So if there's any type of inquiries by the department, more information required, we'll be the intermediary for that. So we're the designated agent for that. We deal with decisions that have to be appealed. Sometimes there might be some part of the equation that's missed out in terms of maybe misinformation that's provided by an employee, and it results in an application decision has to be appealed because, in other words, it has been refused. So we do those as well. We haven't much experience in that area, I might add, because we haven't had too many decisions going against us. The other end of it that we look after in terms of employment is an entry visa. So it's not all countries that people can just walk up to Dublin Airport and come in with an employment permit and say, I'm here to work. Some countries are required to apply in advance for what's known as an entry visa. And we also follow up with those. And again, that's a two-pronged approach. the employee and the employer, and most of the information is employee based, but obviously we have to come back to an employer for some extra information regarding that. Sometimes it can be accommodation or the various different services that are being provided by the company for the employee. Now, back to general employment. To work in Ireland, obviously all non-European nationals are required an employment permit. There are cases where some people are granted permission by the Minister for Justice. These are various different permissions. I'm going to use one as an example, and an example only is a stamp 4. So the likes of those people don't need permission from the Minister to work in the country. They can go into full-time employment with no restrictions. However, the employment permit obviously does bring about restrictions because we have salary requirements, hourly requirements, and obviously contracts. It has to be for 2 years. So the type of permit usually leads to residency permission. So the residency permission that's always granted is for 1 year, even though the permit is usually for a 2-year period. The Minister for Justice will always give 1 year permission, and that's on the basis that the employee has to show that they have been compliant with the terms of the employment permit. So in other words, 12 months down the road, they must show a P60 that shows they've earned 30,000 if that's the salary, and they also must show the relevant pay slips as well. So a company who's offering that position of employment, it must be registered, obviously, with the company's registered office. So it has to be an Irish registered company who's registered with Revenue as an Irish employer. There are some differences in that, like when you get into contract for services or maybe essential services coming from people coming in to do work. There's a different role in terms of revenue for that, but essentially the Irish entity always has to be proved, and an external company will not be able to come into Ireland to do contracts unless there is an Irish entity. So the critical skills permit, it's one that targets the highly skilled people, and it's to encourage them to take up permanent residence in Ireland. It's primarily based on your degree qualifications. So if you're an architect, you apply for a job as an architect. If you're a doctor, you apply for a job as a doctor. In the construction industry, if you're an engineer, obviously there's different types of engineers, but it must be that equivalent degree qualification. Otherwise, it doesn't qualify for critical skills. The employment permits, I suppose, they're brought about by evidence-based case for applicants. So the Department of Business and Enterprise will use various different mechanisms whereby they will look at each sector and they will determine, we'd say, the type of permits that are needed, or are there permits needed for particular jobs. So they do look at things in the sector, and they look at things like, is it important to the economy? Is there projected growth? Is there employment in that sector? What types of occupations are required? Are there labour shortages? Is there certain quantitative evidence, consequences for the sector if the labour demands are not achieved? So they do try to keep your sector in mind when they're deciding what type of permits should be allowed and the type of jobs that they should allow permits be issued for. So I'm reliably informed by your representative body is that the CIF advised the Minister Humphreys, and her predecessor perhaps as well, of the need for employment permits and the need to extend the opportunities of employment outside of the European Union, because skills that were on the ineligible category of permits were putting a halt to you guys getting people in to do the work. So following lobbying with the CIF and a detailed submission, changes to the eligibility criteria were made in April 2019. And we see those changes coming about, like in occupations added to the critical skills list, We've civil engineers, quantity surveyors, construction project managers, mechanical and electrical engineers. And then we've work that has been removed off the ineligible list, which now means we can apply for general permits. We have your sheet metal workers and welding trades, pipe fitters, air conditioning and refrigeration engineers, shuttering carpenters, glaziers, window fabricators and fitters, scaffolders, stagers and riggers, and crane drivers. And we also see that the quota system was brought in to the wet trades like plasterers and bricklayers. Plasterers subject to a quota of 250, bricklayers also subject to a quota of 250. Where these quotas are at the moment, I wouldn't be certain, but I know there hasn't been a huge uptake in them, so that there's still, if you like to say, those vacancies could be still there to be filled. The responsibility in terms of applying for a general permit, unfortunately, we still have to do what's known as a labour market needs test. Now, you might say this is a very futile exercise, but unfortunately, it's part of the legislation. If it's part of the legislation, nobody's above the law. So that includes the department. They cannot act outside that piece of legislation, which is determined each year by regulations signed by the minister. So there is a mandatory labour market needs test. It requires one of them, which is free, and that's registration with the Department of Social Protection. It's a free website that your company, your business entity has to be registered on and advertise the position that you're looking for an employment permit for. So the other two aspects of that is that the national newspaper must be used. An alternative platform has to be used. Now, we have been using some of the national papers and some other entities. We've that narrowed down now to one service under the one umbrella, but it still gives those two places, the national newspaper and the alternative means of advertising. It's a lower price, and it's the best price we have achieved so far. So that's something we hand on to the client. We don't mark up the prices of the advertising. So if we're charged €450, you're charged €450. So that advertisement must include a description. It doesn't have to be the full description of the employment. It has to obviously name the job and a brief 1 or 2 lines on the description of the employment, the name of the employer and the location of the employment, and the hours of work and the salary. And it would have to describe, if it's a company name with a business trading, it also has to include that. So it must say columnhilliard.com trading as Brian Fitzgerald at the same address. So it's business identities and company identities must be put into that advertising. There are different types of work that we do, and I just got different to the employment permit, and it might suit some of maybe the larger companies that might be viewing here today, whereby you need a specialist to come in from outside of Europe. Like you might need somebody from Canada who needs to share their technical information regarding planning, regarding maybe regional construction in terms of wind power, stuff like that. So these are shorter term applications, and they're called atypical schemes. It's an application scheme that works with the Department of Justice. So if we can make the case that the skills that you need to bring in is for a temporary period, and the person remains salaried outside of Ireland, obviously with the company in its home country, we can make a case to get somebody in for that period of time, for the shorter period of time. Has to be a fixed period, everything has to be outlined. Applications like that are taking maybe 20 days. So it's a very quick turnaround in terms of getting a result. Works easier if it's somebody coming from a country that's not visa required. So I'm using Canada as an example there. You get an atypical scheme for somebody from Canada today, they can come in tomorrow. If you're getting similar for somebody, let's say from Venezuela, their entry visa required, it could take another 3 months to get the entry visa. So just to remember that one. Um, the common reasons why an employment permit would be refused, it could be based on previous immigration and security. So like a person whom you're employing might have something in the closet that they're not making aware to you. That can be an issue in terms of national security. These checks are done, believe it or not. It might be that you, the company, has had some experience in terms of with employment with somebody that hasn't worked out. So there could be a kind of a black mark there against you or somebody within the company. That can happen, that we'd say the present people in charge wouldn't be aware of. Experience and qualifications, again, when they're checked, and they do go into detail, like checking the qualifications in particular, and if they see that they're not what they're supposed to be, that can be eliminated. A previous immigration history, somebody again who's not telling you exactly what their immigration history was or what their passport was, you might have difficulties getting that person in. And again, this is where we come in. If somebody hands me a passport, I can read it and tell you where a person has been for the last 10 years from reading the information in the passport. I can ask the relevant questions to that person. Why were they on that particular permission? Why were they in a different country? And this is where we eke and tweak out problems that may occur down the line. It might be somebody who goes to you now currently and tells you they can work. And when they come to us, we know that not alone can they not work for you, but they shouldn't be in the country. And that involves looking for another permission, which means we have to look to the Department of Justice to get them a temporary residence permission. So that's a reason for stuff failing. Fraudulent documents does happen. You get all sorts of CVs, you get all sorts of information. It's very easy to do documentary quirks and changes on the software that's available now. So it does happen, but the department, they will check and they do document verification. The job and the pay offered are at odds with the experience shown. It's a regular occurrence and it does come up. Or in fact, if you look at sometimes the actual job that's been offered may not be in line with the person who, we say the experience that they're showing. Maybe they have 6 years, or in actual fact they've only 6 months, and you might think you're getting an experienced crane driver, and essentially you're getting somebody who's driven a crane maybe on PlayStation form. So yeah, these sort of analogies do come up and are the cause of employment permits being refused. We have a lot of associations, like you're probably wondering, these guys, Work Permits Ireland, they're based in Dublin. Have they any credentials? Have they any credibility? Well, I direct you towards our websites, PC Immigration Ireland, Work Permits Ireland, and you would see the profile of Colm Hilliard and Paul Cullen on that. We have I won't say a checkered career, it wouldn't be fair to say that. We have a career based on Garda Síochána, and a lot of it involved national security, international security, and it also involved, for the greater part of our career, immigration. And in terms of the work we do, we have developed very close associations with the Restaurant Association of Ireland, the Irish Hotels Federation, the Irish Road Haulage Association, obviously with the Construction Industry Federation now. So our experience goes back a few years. We do a lot of work in terms of employment permits, and we get good results. You can contact us in our office directly on telephone, which is the Dublin number 01 8733 772. The email is info@workpermits.ie, and the address of the building, if you want to call in, 65 Middle Street, Dublin 1, Ireland. And that really concludes for what I have to offer today. I hope you have some questions. I'll be able to answer some of them. It might necessitate organising a consultation with you or some member of your staff, and we can go into it in more detail. But I look forward to your questions, and I'll provide as many answers in as short a space of time as I can. Once again, thanks for your attention. Okay, guys, we have a question here, and it's regarding somebody looking for a work permit for a degree qualified quantity surveyor to know if they have to be registered with the SCSI. Now, in terms of that job, the fact that it's only recently added to the list of critical skills, heretofore, if it was a general permit situation, and we have this experience with other, we'd say, planning roles and that there's no regulatory body membership required. It's something I'm going to have to find out for you. It's not that I'm aware of, but I would prefer to find out now that it's moved on to critical skills. Do we actually have to have a registration? Because with some of the professions, it is something that's required.
Okay, there's a second question there, which I'll read out if you like, which is how long does it take to process an employment permit for construction?
Yeah, currently at the moment, it's taking 11 weeks, and that's under general permit or critical skills permit. If you have trusted partner status, then you're looking at 3 weeks at the moment. But that's 11 weeks from the date the application is submitted. And just to recap in terms of general permit, it's 2 weeks mandatory advertising. So your process needs to include that 2 weeks. So you're looking at 13 weeks for the general really, and then 11 for the critical skills.
Okay, there's another question there. Is there an advantage of to being a trusted partner?
Yeah, the advantage is that you get your permit dealt with faster. So you have a 3-week period, a 3-week turnaround, as opposed to 11 weeks at the moment. And it doesn't get any better than that now.
Okay, the next question there was, are Work Permits Ireland, are they directly involved in recruitment of individuals?
We don't directly recruit, but we do get from our platforms, our social media platforms, we get a lot of inquiries from people around the globe, and we encourage them to send their CVs to us. And in that regard, we have a partnership now, an associate partnership with Cohen Construction, and we deal with Kieran Carr there. He's the national manager, and they're based in the same building as part of Mason Alexander, who are a very reputable firm too, and they're on Haddington Road. So Kieran would deal with all the, we'd say, potential candidates that we would have for recruitment. It's not an area of expertise for us, and that's why we have the partnership with the people who know best, and that's Cohen Recruitment.
Okay, there's another question here. Why are persons interested in coming to work in Ireland?
Well, it's a good question, because the interest in coming to work is not, okay, it is to do with qualifications and it's to do with employment, but it's the residency permission that's granted there. So the employment permit gives somebody permission to work for 2 years, and then that's renewable for 3 years thereafter. So somebody coming to work to Ireland for a company, they want to stay with that company because they're buying into, if you want to call it a product. They get residency permission for 2 years, then a further 3 years. That's 5 years. Once they hit that moment of 5 years, they're then entitled to make an application for an Irish passport. And if we lose the Irish identity in it, it's a European passport that they're looking for. And that's why, you know, employers shouldn't be afraid of taking on the employment permit role, because you're essentially getting a contract from the government with the national harp on it stating that you now have this person contracted for 2 years. If you renew the conditions, it's going to be issued for a further 3 years. So you're looking at that 5-year term. People want to come, they want to be loyal to the company because they want to get what they're looking for out at the end of it is a residence permission that will give them a European passport. Question here now. The residency permit, does the employee apply for that? Yeah, the residency permit is issued by the Department of Justice, and it's called an Irish Residence Permit Card. They apply to that, they make an appointment If it's in Dublin, they make an appointment with the Irish Naturalisation and Immigration Service in Burkey. If they're living outside the Dublin and Greater Dublin area, then it's more than likely going to be the local Garda station. And they make an appointment online with Innis in Burkey. They go with the employment permit, they go with their bank statement, medical insurance, a couple of other little bits and pieces. And based on the foot of the employment permit, they get their residency permit there.
There's another question here, which is what protection is afforded to employers with respect to hired workers? Like, can they cancel a work permit or terminate an individual's employment?
Yeah, well, the protection that's offered there is that in terms of an employer, and again, I'll go back, let's say, to the crane driver, and you've hired a crane driver, and again, when he arrives on the site on Monday morning, you discover that this is basically a PlayStation merchant. He hasn't a clue how to even get into the crane, let alone drive it. Well, the employer can look for the permit to be cancelled. In terms of that, the employee is also protected that if he's brought on site to drive a crane and employed on a permit to drive a crane, and he's handed the keys of the dumper and he's told to drive around the site, and that he can say, sorry, I'm not hired on my permit to do that. I can't go outside the remit of the government permit. So the protection is afforded to both entities, both to the employer and the employee. However, the underlying fact of all of this is you can't just make an empty allegation. So you need to have this fact-based. You need to be able, if you're having a word with the employee, obviously you need corroboration of your conversations. Likewise, it would be the other way around. An employee cannot just make an empty can suggestion that they're being treated badly by the employer. It has to be fact-based. It would be investigated by the WRC, which is the Workplace Relations Commission, and they're basically the police of the employment permits, but they work in favour of both employer and employee.
There's another question here which refers to, can an individual subject to a work permit leave the employment with one company in favour of working for another?
Not directly. Again, if there's an employment permit issued to a person to work for company A, the person must and only work for that company. If they're offered a higher salary by company B, the only way they can leave is by applying to the Department of Business and Enterprise for that permit to be cancelled. Then they have to apply to the Minister for Justice office for a temporary residence permission to stay in the country. Then they have to apply for a brand new permit. But again, it brings me back to the previous question. In order for that permit or for that person to move, it cannot be salary based, because that's not a reason to leave employment. It would have to be based on the fact that they were being mistreated or either asked to do part of a job that they're not being, I would say the permit doesn't permit them to do. Then they have grounds to move to another company, but it cannot be based on headhunting in terms of salary or maybe better conditions or bonuses or anything like that. Simply just can't happen like that. Another question there now, does the employer have to ensure that the employee has a residency permit? Yes, the employer is obliged under the employment permits legislation. The thing about it is there's no point saying, oh, I didn't know that existed, because in terms of law, ignorance of law is no excuse, so it wouldn't be accepted. And there are quite heavy fines in place there. So the onus is on the employer to know who they're employing, to know their background. If they're non-European, they should be aware that the person should have some form of permission to work. And it brings me on to another part of our work as well, is that we actually go to companies and we do on-site audits of, we'd say, non-European. So there's two, I'm just going to use one example here, Stamp 2. So any HR people looking in here know that Stamp 2 is a student permission and it only allows 20 hours per week. However, there are variables to that. A Stamp 2 permission can, in some cases, have been issued, and it allows the person to work unlimited hours. The special reasons behind it is partly brought in as part of regularizing a lot of students who fell off the cart in terms of immigration. They come back on it. They're handed this temporary permission for 18 months. Sometimes it's renewable after another 18 months. But their immigration card or their Irish residence permit would just show stamp 2. So you automatically think, that's it, he can't work full time. So it's just to be able to look into the background and see that the employees that you have, that they exist, that they should be there, and that they legally can be employed by you. So we provide that service as well on site, we'd say company auditing in terms of staff and their eligibility for employment. Just another question there, does the employer have to ensure that the employee has a residency permit? Yes, we're back to that question again. Yes, the onus is on the employer, and there's no way around that. You have to know who you're employing. You can't just claim ignorance that you weren't aware of that person or if they had permission or not. Okay, just a question there in relation to subcontractors. Does the main contractor have to ensure that subcontractors have all the relevant documents? The short answer to that is yes. I know you're looking at it as a subcontractor, but it's the site relevance and it's contract work it does come in, and the answer is yes. That's the short answer. It's a little bit more lengthy than that in terms of who the subcontractors are. Are they Irish based? Are they English based? What type of staff they have? So it is a little bit more to it, but the short answer is yes, that you have to be aware. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think the last comment there was a thank you. So unless anyone has anything further, on behalf of CIF, we'd like to thank Colin for offering his time today. So any queries, come back to CIF, and you have the contact details for Colin there, and you see the website, which is workpermits.ie.